As I like graphical rules very much, I had just had to include Bähr's rule. So, there is a blocked pair of rooks, pawns, and the attacker has an additional passed pawn from the D to the H file. If it is on the C file, then it is different. White could push it to C6 and then win by triangulation, so no need for a rule, or if with other pawns, or white would also usually be winning, so no need for a rule. But in this case, a rule is very helpful, I think, as there are different cases. Okay, the first case is the trivial one, but that the rule can be applied, it is also important that the kings have advanced to their best possible positions in this relative sense, and this means white must improve the king here first. King e6 draws, while king g5. Now the kings are in their best, relatively best positions, and this is the real position for the application of the rule. And then, if the blocked rook's pawn of the attacker has crossed the middle of the board, meaning it is on a5 or a6, then the attacker is always winning. This is the trivial case of the rule. And the reason is that the attacking king takes the a-pawn and then moves to the key square b7, and then it's game over. So this really is the trivial case. But okay, it must be said. It could of course also be calculated, but okay, why calculate when such a rule gives the result immediately? There might be exceptions, of course, if the attacking passed pawn is very far back, like on d2 or e2, and then you have to calculate, of course. Don't use the rules then, make concrete calculation, but in this case there is obviously no counter play by black, so the rule, it must be a case in point for the rule, and white is always winning. First advance the king to the best possible position, and then cross over to take the pawn. Yeah, g7 of course would be a big mistake. Now it would be a draw. Yeah. And of course it is bad to advance the pawn. For this case of the rule it doesn't change the result, but for the second case it does. So let's see what happens if the attacking pawn hasn't crossed the middle of the board. The attacking blocked rook's pawn. Then draw a diagonal from the defending rook's pawn to their c file, back to the c file, and then a diagonal in the direction of the back rank of the attacker. And then this is the interesting case of Bähr's rule. Both kings again must have taken the relatively best positions. If the attacking passed pawn has passed beyond the diagonal, has crossed the diagonal, then the position is a draw. And if the pawn is on the diagonal or below, then the attacker wins. So, of course, immediate corollary is don't advance. The attacker shouldn't advance the passed pawn. But here the result can be seen directly from these graphical means with the diagonal, and I like those rules very much because then I can see it immediately. It could, of course, also be calculated, but at least I would take much longer to calculate it. Just using this graphical visualization is much quicker for me. Yeah. So this position is a draw as the pawn has crossed the diagonal. Can also be seen by calculation. And here comes also the explanation for the diagonals. This diagonal is the way of the defending king in the borderline case. And the other diagonal is the way of the attacking king. No borderline case because it's always the same way, of course. So this diagonal in a way is fixed. And this diagonal, yeah, if the pawn is on the diagonal, then black's king would now be on d5. Or if it would be below, then maybe even on d4 or d3 or whatever. And then white is, of course, winning. Because then the attacking king can always make a body check against the defender and reach a key square and win. But as matters are, this diagonal is just good enough to cross the road, and so here it's a draw. So the diagonals, Bähr found those diagonals from the ways of the kings. a4 to b5 is always white's king, and then the king blocks access to the c6 square, so it can be made longer. And then he ingeniously found his rule that he could just take the other diagonal starting from the c6 square to g2. This is a diagonal in the borderline case. So that if the attacking passed pawn is on the diagonal or below, then the attacker wins. And if it has crossed it, as is can be seen here, then it is a draw. So, Bähr's rule. There is a blocked pair of rook's pawns, and the attacker has an additional passed pawn. It can be from the D to the H file. Anywhere on D2, D7, H7, H2, wherever. Then the rule says, there are a few exceptions, but okay, the rule says if the blocked rook's pawn of the attacker has crossed the middle of the board, then the attacker always wins. And if it hasn't crossed the middle of the board, then draw a diagonal from the defender's pawn to the C file, and then another diagonal in the direction of the attacker's back rank. And then the rule says, if the passed pawn of the attacker has crossed the diagonal, then the position is a draw. And both kings must occupy relatively optimal positions like here. This is also very important, of course. If the attacker could advance on a key square of the f-pawn, then no matter of how many blocked rook's pawns are anywhere, he would be winning, of course. So it is important that the defender blocks the pass and that both kings are in their relatively optimal position. And if the attacking passed pawn is on the diagonal or below, then the attacker is winning. I like those graphical rules very much because for me it is much easier to see this and then to evaluate the position than to calculate the variation to the end, but that is also possible. But you must see that this, okay, in this position you can calculate king d4, king f5 and so on, and then it's a draw, but if this is the resulting position of a long exchange variation, 10 moves long, then you can say, okay, the rule says it's a draw, while continuing to calculate makes matters then even more difficult. But you can decide, of course, for yourself if you want to learn and apply these graphical rules like Bähr's rule, or if you want to solve such problems by concrete calculation. Then the guideline would help you, of course, that you should not advance your passed pawn, because obviously the further advanced it is, the more likely a draw becomes due to the rule. But the rule even precisely states the borderline